Welcome, everybody. I'll ask everyone to kind of settle down and find your seat as we get ready to start service. Anyone that's out there in the lobby still grabbing your refreshment, if you could wrap it up and head in. Give everyone a minute. Yeah. All right. Welcome, everybody. Awesome Sunday. Awesome to see everyone here tonight again, joining us to worship our one and true God. Join us together in community and fellowship. And thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here. And as a reminder, the statement and mission of our church is a community becoming like Jesus, where people come home to God. You know, we're those people who strive to devote our lives to God, that our lives would be encompassed by Him, that every aspect of our life would be a representation and a mirror of who He is and what He did and what He was here for, to display the love, the grace, the mercy to those who was around Him. And that's what we are here for. That's what we're here to do, is to grow in that, to become like Jesus. And you know, where as a representation of Him, as a mirror of Him, you know, when people come in here, they could see that and they could feel like they're at home. You know, they're coming here to be home with God. And as we go to the next slide, anyone that's here for the first time, welcome. We thank you for joining us. And if you'd like to connect with us, maybe if it's not your first time and you haven't connected us, please scan the QR code or fill out the little pamphlet in the seat in front of you. It's just a way for us to connect with you, get to know you a little bit more, and maybe find a way to plug you in or find a way to help you. And there's also a gift bag at the entrance. Please grab one if it's your first time here. And for those who do consistently come, thank you for your generosity. You know, if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be able to gather here in fellowship and worship. We wouldn't be able to donate and give back to the community. And so we just thank you for your giving and your generosity. And I think that's it for slides. I would like to welcome Sophia up onto stage, who's going to be doing our scripture reading for today. Those who are willing and able, please stand as we read scripture.
Today we'll be reading from Exodus 3, 1 through 15. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within the bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land, into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivitites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh to bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, I suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they asked, What is his name? Then what should I tell him? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites: I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. This is the word of the Lord.
Last month, I remember standing in a group with a few of you, or quite a few of you, at Lily's and Stan's kitchen. I do have a picture for that. And Artem, Mary's husband, he was close to the evening. He decided to kind of, I don't know, open a conversation with a very lighthearted question of, what are some of the regrets that you guys have? Right? So this is like the end. This is like 12 a.m., I think, at this point. And he's like, what are some of the regrets? And so people went around in a circle sharing their regrets. Anyone here thought about buying Bitcoin when it was worth buying it, and now you'd probably be a millionaire and so on, right? So, of course, most of them were lighthearted things, but some, no matter how you phrase them, are still laced with a sting of missed opportunity. Something that's like, even though you bring it up, it's like a small regret, and yet you still feel it. It's almost like this visceral feeling that you experience. Either a blunder that was so avoidable or a missed opportunity, whatever it might be. And most of the time, the things that we regret are things that could have changed the trajectory of our life, meaning that I regret something because I could have been in a better place. I could have been a better person. I could have been a better that and this in some meaningful way, or it would have at least spared me some grief and sorrow and pain of making that wrong turn. That night, nothing big surfaced, but the reality is that the farther you travel in life, you know this well, the bigger often is the bag of the collected regrets that we carry. And the deepest regrets are the ones that come from sin, or the Bible calls sin, right? Things that we grieve our Creator and go against the way that we were created to be and were called to live. Moments where we hurt someone, moments where we betrayed trust, when we acted out of pride or anger or lust, and we can't take it back. And there's a deep regret with that. Researchers call regret one of the most persistent negative emotions of human experience, meaning it is constantly there. Thousands of times you are likely to return back to the things in your life that you regret. That night, Artem brought something to the surface that we all revisit quite often. Like I said, statistically, we'll revisit it thousands of times over a lifetime. And so what are the typical solutions that are offered for regret? I mean, if it's a persistent human problem, then we ought to have some good solutions. Usually things like just forgive yourself. Right? Like forgive yourself. Don't be too hard on yourself. But see, if you're the criminal and the judge, how can you really declare yourself innocent? How can you really forgive yourself if you're the one who is the criminal, and then you're also calling a judgment on yourself? Or we hear things like your past does not define you, but the truth is, unless something new comes into your life, your past has shaped you so far and will continue to shape you in a new way. If there is nothing changing within you, or people would say, just move on. Just forget it and keep going forward. Well, C.S. Lewis has a good point on this in his book on defending Christianity. He says, we all want progress, but progress means getting nearer to the place where you want to be. And if you have taken a wrong turning, then to go forward does not get you any nearer on the right path, right? If you are on the wrong road, progress means doing a roundabout, turning around, and walking back to the right road. And in that case, the man who turns back the soonest is the most progressive man. So to move on in the same direction doesn't really get you anywhere at all. And so with each year, right, regret and shame, these are the voices that continue to shape our identity, especially if we're not dealing with it. And they shape the way how we live our days ahead. And so we end up longing for something, or probably and most likely for someone with a big S, capital S, someone external to free us from this weight. Somebody to say that you don't have to carry that anymore, and there's a way for you to leave it behind. And if there was anyone in the Bible who knew exactly what it was like to live with a messed up past, it's got to be Moses in chapter 3 of Exodus. This is a guy laden with regret and shame and the past that is pretty messed up in terms of the opportunities that were before him. If you missed the first few sermons, we're in a series of going through the book of Exodus. It's 40 chapters. We're not going to cover every single one of them. So far, we've done that. But going forward, we're going to skip chapters and kind of focus on some themes. And we're going through the book of Exodus, where the grand narrative that unfolds is meant to open our eyes and tune our ears to a melody that runs underneath the whole biblical story. That whatever is happening in Exodus is somehow a pattern for the way that God moves throughout the world. And it's both a macro picture of humanity, macro, big picture of humanity that applies to all, but it's also a micro picture of how God's plan is meant to work out in each individual life, your and mine, of those who are willing to follow him. And so what God did to the people and with the people of Israel in Exodus is something that he always does, and continues to do. And so you've got these chords or progressions or a melody that's running through the whole book of Exodus, and it's creation, enslavement, liberation, and renewal. Now, first, as we started going into this book, we saw that God moves and creates and blesses people. Even in the midst of suffering, he is the source of all that is good. He's the sustainer of the universe, and even if he doesn't move a finger, already the fact that the earth is continuing forward, the time is given to us as a gift, he is the source of all that is good. And then we saw in the story of Exodus, Pharaoh, a ruler who acts very much like Paul was sharing, very, very much like the serpent in the garden, right? He's enslaving people. He's bent on destroying everything that is good. He's oppressing fellow human beings. And today we're going to be arriving finally at the third step of this melody, the liberation, third movement, a moment where God begins to move towards freeing his people from oppression. For Israel, it's the Pharaoh. For them, that's the biggest problem right now. But later, as you'll see, it's also not just being freed from the oppression of Pharaoh, but it's getting the Egypt out of their hearts. Because although they're miles and miles away, Egypt tends to follow them, and their old identity is threatening to overpower them. And then in this, we come to the fourth movement, and that is renewal, because God doesn't just simply want to rescue people, just get you out of the problem, and now you're on your own, but he leads us out of sin into a new life, into a new calling, a new identity. And such is the movement over all the history of how God works in us and through us. This is the underlying melody of Exodus. And that if we're paying attention, right, to it, this is what we would see in not just Exodus, but in every other subsequent book, in the way that God works with the people of Israel, and so on. And together we hope to look at these vignettes of Exodus, stopping at critical points to see how is it that God moves in history. I think one of the beautiful things of that, when you study these, is that you realize he's very predictable, right? He laid out a certain way that he deals with people. And so if we tune in and listen, we can get to know the character of God and see that he's dependable and trustworthy and can do much more in our life than we ever thought. And so last time we ended up on a cliffhanger, essentially, and Stan mentioned this. Exodus 2, verse 25 says, after telling us the story of Moses, God saw the people of Israel and God knew. Now, that was the last sentence of chapter 2. So what did we see so far? Excuse me. The narrator of Exodus previously invited us to see, if you remember, the language of Genesis in the beginning, to show how God has been working behind scenes all along. Even though God's mentioned only at the end of chapter 2, if you will, for the first time he's coming unseen, but reality is the language of Genesis is meant to wake us up to he's already been working. He's already in the people. He's the architect and author of human life. Even as humanity turned away from him, he's always been working, all the way from the very beginning. And yet, in the middle of enslavement, we find him working out a plan already. And so we saw that Moses' arrival in Egypt was already orchestrated by God. That this wasn't just, a kid was born and he's destined to be a leader and a ruler. But we see that through faithful women, 7 of them at the very least, who were pro-life in defiance of Pharaoh, he comes unseen. And from the moment he appears, it seems like he's the perfect candidate, right? Like he's got access to the court, he's got a great upbringing, rich heritage from both sides, in the court and a Hebrew by birth. He looks like the kind of person who could really lead a reform. Like if anybody's going to change the situation for the slaves, it's got to be Moses. And yet what ends up happening is he hurries ahead of God and kind of sabotages the whole plan. He takes things into his own hands Well, and it doesn't turn out so good for him. And now, next thing you know, he's a fugitive and he's on the run. And we're left with this question of, at the end of chapter 2 and moving into chapter 3, how God will use Moses when he's hundreds of miles away from Egypt. And so that brings us to the first verse of today, Exodus 3, verse 1. I'm reading from NIV. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. All right, so a week has passed since last time we heard about Moses, meaning when Stan preached last time. But now for Moses, 40 years have passed. 40 years have passed between the previous verse and this one. That's half of a lifetime right there, right? 40 years, just grasp that. It's hard to overstate how contrasting these 40 years were in comparison to the previous 40 years spent in Egyptian courts. In Egypt, he had power, privilege, and future, and now he's what? He's a shepherd in the wilderness. And notice he doesn't even have his own flock, right? He's taking care of his father-in-law's sheep day after day for 40 years. And so this is 40 years of reflecting on life, right? His complicated past weighs down on him as he thinks about like what I could have been and what I am. And yet he's moved on, he started a family. But of all the ambitions that he had in the past, nothing is left, right? He's now just tending some sheep. And I bet he's thought many times of what have I done with my life? I had all the goings for being someone important, and yet I squandered my opportunities. Vlad, if you're hearing me, if you go in Planning Center, there are notes attached in there. There's a link to that because I see you're behind on slides. All right, so see, I messed up on that. Usually I send him the notes right before the sermon. Today we kind of had a switcheroo on who's doing the slides, and so hopefully he'll find those. But that's what Moses is thinking. Well, not that, but much more deeper. I've messed up on life. Like, really, what have I come to? I'm 80 years old now, half life spent in Egypt, half of life here in the land of Midian. And now here I am with a messed up past, living in obscurity in wilderness. This is where Moses is. But you see, we learn something interesting in scriptures, and that is that God works in all of our lives, and often, especially in the season of wilderness. In the places where we feel like this is boring, somebody else is having a prominent, important life, a missionary, a pastor, a person serving in some kind of important ministry, doing something. We always look towards somebody who is out there doing the work, and my life just seems to be a dry season of not much change, and I'm just doing the ordinary things. And yet in scriptures we see that when to us it seems like not much is happening, those years, if we open ourselves to God, God is doing something beyond the surface. None of it is going to be wasted. Think of Sarah and Abraham. A promise is given to them, but then 25 years until they finally have a son. That's a long time to wait. In scriptures, on a narrative, it seems like between 2 chapters or 3 chapters, you read it and there it is. But in real life, it's a long time. Joseph, 13 years a slave in Egypt before he rises to power and is able to do what God called him to do. Jesus himself, 30 years of ordinary life before any public ministry commenced. 30 years in obscurity, ordinary life with his parents. I skipped David. David, 15 years has spent between the time when he was, hey, you're going to be a king, and then 15 years of waiting, running away, being persecuted, and not even knowing if that's ever going to come about, and then finally becoming the king of Israel. Paul spent 8 to 15 years before his first missionary journey. Let's not forget that the wilderness season could be long, and yet it's not lost on God, because in those seasons, he's forming us. And so it is with Moses. For 40 years, he's learning one thing, how to shepherd sheep. He's learning one thing, how to shepherd sheep, because one day he will shepherd God's people, but he doesn't know that yet. He doesn't know it. He's just doing a job, which is probably bored of at this point. For now, it's the most ordinary part of his life. Until one day, a strange thing catches his attention. And so we go to Exodus 3, verse 2. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. And Moses saw that the bush was on fire and it did not burn up. Now, If you're a reader, not like me, but I think all of us kind of suffer from this. But if you're a reader of the way that, like, of the original language, and if you're a reader that you know the story so far, then you would recognize hyperlinks to Genesis, right? Like every word that is mentioned here, it might be different in English depending on translations. But when you're reading it in Hebrew, all of it is linking back to the vocabulary of Genesis. See, last time when we saw a similar language, and it's kind of grouped together here in these verses, would be when humanity was exiled out of the garden. In the original language, the bush that he's seeing on fire is not so much of a bush as it is a tree. It's a tree that grows in a desert. Sure, it's not a huge tree, but it is a tree nevertheless. And it sounds like this. And Moses saw that the tree was not eaten up by fire, right? That would be the way to say it in Hebrew. That it was not eaten up by fire. It's kind of nerdy stuff, but remember Eve? Remember when the woman saw the fruit of the tree and she took some of it and ate it? So here you kind of have this, the narrator is kind of playing off the themes of Genesis and saying that this is to signal that something groundbreaking is about to happen. And it's connected to the way the first time humans responded to God. This is the replay of Genesis. Moses is up on a hill now, which the Eden was also thought to be up on a hill. But instead of a garden, the present reality was wilderness. That's where humanity ended up being. And so in this moment, you have the tree and the presence of God, and the tree is not eaten up, if you will, right? Like all of these are meant to be, this is, like I said, super nerdy, but it's there. And the reader of an ancient Near Eastern culture would kind of see that and feel that. Whoa, this is what I just read in Genesis. God is making something new. A new creation moment is about to happen. And so we lean in to see how will Moses respond. Because, as you know, Eve stretched out her hand and eaten the fruit and distrusted God. Will Moses trust God? That's kind of the underlying question that hangs. And so verse 3 goes on to say, so Moses thought, I will go over there and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. Now, he doesn't know what it is just yet, but it's enough to shake his attention off of the things that preoccupied his mind until now. At least it wakes him up from his ordinary life, right? Something is calling his attention. And it's kind of interesting because God didn't speak right away. He sort of gave him a distracting thing. And I don't know, has he seen this bush before? Maybe. But at this point, he's like, I'm going to go and check out what this is and what's going on here. And so in verse 4, it says, when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses, and Moses said, here I am. Notice that the encounter happens when Moses had gone over to look. When he paid attention. See, God was already there all along, but it is when we pay attention when the conversation begins. And Moses turns in this point his attention to God. When God calls someone in the scriptures, like especially by name and double name like that, Moses, Moses. I think it was the same with Abraham, and you remember Jesus saying, Martha, Martha. Like it's to announce like something important is about to happen. It's a moment of deep importance. But here's something simple but worth noting, is that God knows Moses by name. And I know that sounds silly. It's very simple. But the story behind, or the idea behind it is that he knows Moses' complicated story so far. When he says Moses, Moses, he's not surprised by his past, or he's ignoring it, or is not aware of it. He knows him thoroughly and deeply in all of the things that he is dealing with. His past, what he has done, what he has been through, and yet the beauty of this moment is that God still calls him. God wants to call you even in the midst of regrets and shame and all the things that seem to press down on you. He sees all of that and calls to you and to me. The underlying truth is that God knows you and me by name as well. He knows the intricacies of who I am, who you are, and none of our life surprises him. And yet, the creator of the universe, just as with Moses, he wants to have a conversation with you and with me. He is calling to each one of us in the same way. Anyone who's willing to listen and pay attention and turn and say, yes, here I am. I'm ready to listen. Now, Moses responds at first. The here I am, I know it sounds like it's kind of noble, like here I am, I came. But really, it kind of sounds like, oh, hey, burning tree, what's up? Like, I'm here, I showed up, right? And the reason we know that is because in the next verse, like he's approaching it a little nonchalantly, not grasping the significance of the moment. But God is compassionate and merciful. And this is one of the first moments when God comes so close in contact with humanity, right? And so God speaks to him and says, do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God of your father, Abraham, God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. This is where it starts to sink in for Moses, right? That this is not just a strange phenomenon on an otherwise ordinary day, but this is a life-changing encounter with the living God. And this moment comes into the lives of so many people. I know a lot of you are witnesses to that because where at one point God seems so distant or unseen or unrelatable, kind of far away and out of your mind, suddenly he becomes either through a scripture that you heard or through a service that you've been to or through maybe talking to a friend. He all of a sudden becomes so real, and it's undeniable that you're in the presence of the one who knows you so well, who has seen you all along, who knows all of your things that you have walked with. And so God tells Moses, this is holy ground. This is holy ground because I came here. Not the dirt itself is holy, although for a moment it becomes such because of his presence. But he's saying that my presence has come down on this place, and I am interacting with you in a new way. Now, this is the first time, if you were to read all the way from Genesis up to this point, the first time God's holiness comes up. The only other way that holy was used in the past is in a few different passages, but mainly to describe something else. In particular, for example, the Sabbath. Right? The Sabbath is to be holy. And this is for the first time God's holiness interacts with a human being like this, so close. So yes, it's an important moment. God is holy. He's totally separated and different and powerful and all good. That's who God is. And right now he's breaking into humanity. And I don't think most of humanity fully grasps or even comprehends, including Christians sometimes as well, what that even means. That this being, the Creator, the one who is the reason for all of our existence, he comes so close to us. And so we almost see that he treats it nonchalantly here. And so removing the shoes, it's just, for Moses, it's just an outward cultural expression of reverence and respect. And that, as you know, that's a practice that even today in many cultures we still have. Like, I don't know, some of you probably grew up in a household maybe where you dare try to walk in your shoes in the house. That's not fun. So the point being is that this is something that relatable to Moses. And so God tells him, remove the shoes. I want you to understand the holiness of this moment. We sometimes have more respect for things like radiation. Right? Like this is not a perfect analogy, but we have more respect for the way we handle radiation or radioactive elements or the sun or even the fire. It's great when it's warming up a house in London. The fire is great when it's in your stove, when it's warm and you're respecting the boundaries of what the fire can do. But get too careless and what you're dealing with is that you have the same fire in the same London, but with devastating consequences. I got a picture of the Great London Fire in the back. All good things at a distance, in a proper context, right? Approach with seriousness, but get too close and you get cooked. So as one approaches the creator of the universe, right? This is a big deal. As one approaches the creator of the universe, one ought to do so in a proper sense of humility and reverence. I mean, if you are going towards that encounter, you realize who you are standing before to. And to do so not out of fear, not out of fear that this powerful and unpredictable being is going to do something to you, but recognizing that we are creatures and we are standing before the presence of our Creator. And so God then identifies himself. He says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, in the ancient world where Moses grew up, with all the deities surrounding, think about Egyptian court. You've seen those, the walls that they painted with all the deities. They had so many of them. Right? And all they were trying to do is attribute, oftentimes, the real malevolent forces, spiritual forces in their life that were oppressing them and trying to put a name to it, if you will. And so with all the deities around, God is identifying himself. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am the same God of Genesis. I am the one who's been with your people. I am the one who has a promise and a covenant that I gave, and I'm fulfilling it. And so Moses is left without a doubt what voice is addressing him. This is not just a random magic trick that came up or some deity or some demonic spirit speaking to him. That it is the God who is working out a promise and a covenant that he made with Abraham, ultimately to bless all nations and bring humanity home into the presence of God. I am the God who began the work in the very beginning. And so before he was curious, now we see Moses is overwhelmed by the presence of God. And so move on to verses 7. And here we see somewhat of keywords. I highlighted some of those, right? The way God responds is, I have seen the misery, I have heard them crying out, and I am concerned about their suffering. And so I have come down to rescue them. And this rescue kind of involves the two plans, right? The liberation and renewal. I want to bring them up and out of that land, but also into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. I wonder how many times Moses have thought and prayed, God, do you see what's going on in Egypt? Like, I'm not there, but what I remember, I hope you've done something around it. And from maybe what I hear, it's still going on. I wonder how many times he prayed, God, are you even hearing the prayers and outcries of my fellow people? Are you hearing our prayers for my relatives, for my friends? Maybe he prayed, God, please come and rescue. Do something about it, Lord. And now, as he's talking, as Moses is talking to God, think about it. God responds and saying that none of this was out of my sight. I have always seen it. None of this was hidden from me. I heard it and I've seen it. And this is one of the defining characteristics of God, is that every time, you can trace it, when you encounter injustice in scriptures, we see God responding. Beginning with the first blood that was spilled by Cain killing Abel, God says, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Every time there is an injustice, there's a voice given to it, and it comes before God. I like how Pastor Tyler Staton put it, injustice makes a sound that God hears. Every injustice, every individual instance of it, it makes a sound and he hears it and it comes to his attention. None of it escapes. He sees, he hears, he responds. More than that, he comes down to liberate in his own timing. And let me tell you, sometimes I want justice to come sooner from my vantage point, and I'm sure you're on the same page. Like from our limited perspective, we seem, why not act sooner? And Psalms are filled with this kind of lament of we trust you, but at the end of the day, why not now? Why not when we needed it, when we feel like we needed it the most? But we can be sure that even if we don't understand God's timing, there will not be a single injustice at the end of our temporal time here on earth that will not meet the justice of God. That he is going to follow through on every single one. This is not something that's going to slip by him at the end of time. Every injustice will be dealt, both in a beautiful way and also in a way that deserves justice. And so God in his justice comes down to liberate the oppressed. But more than that, again, he's not just merely rescuing people. He's taking them into the promised land. He's transforming their suffering, not in just you suffered and now you're free, but you're suffered and you're going to have joy. I want you to live a new life. There is more to liberation than just being freed from sin. There is a new life of full, real, and authentic joy on the other side. And so God says, I will lead them into a good and spacious land. And again, reader of Genesis would notice this good, the word that's used for good is tov. This is the word that underlined every moment of creation. And it was good. And it was good, and it was good. And so what God is saying, I want to bring you into the new, that goodness that you were meant to be. This is that restoration happening, the same word that's used to describe the goodness of God's creation. And so Moses is afraid, but by now, I bet he's getting excited. Right? Finally, God's timing has come. Finally, God's going to do something about it. God will crush the oppressors. He will liberate his people. He will lead them into good and spacious land. And then we arrive at verse 10, where God says, so now, go, Moses, go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So if I'm like Moses, I would have thought, hold up. You just said you're going to do it. I'm really cool with that. And then you said you're sending me to do it. Which one is it? Are you going to do it or am I going to do it? Because if it's up to me, I choose you over me every time, right? Give me just a second. So if you think about it, right, if it's up to me, I would choose to have God do it anytime. And the second question that probably would be in my mind is, why would God send such a failure person like me? Like, why would it be me? Have you seen my resume? Have you seen, like, Lord, you know better than anyone that I have failed to show up for my people before. This is not the first time that I had the inkling of, I would love to be part of that liberation, but I've tried and I have failed. Look at my life. It is full of regrets right now. It is full of shame. It is full of nothingness for the past 40 years. It's a mess. And there's nothing I can bring to the table, right? Like, those are the two thoughts, as you could see, flowing through Moses' mind. One is, which one is it? How is it that you're going to rescue them? With me? And then, why me? And so Moses then kind of verbalizes his thoughts, and he responds to God and says in verse 11, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Right? And this is an honest question. Like, he's not trying to evade it. He's really just asking what I've just described, like what he's thinking behind it. Who am I? 40 years ago, I tried to rescue, but they didn't want anything to do with me. Last time we heard what they told him is, who are you to rule over us? Who has appointed you? Why should we listen to you? And I'm thinking he probably not once replayed that in his mind. Maybe even when he thought the opportunity was to return a good one. But again, who are you that you are to rule over us? I'm a fugitive, he's thinking. Why would they choose me? Or why would you, God, choose me? I'm probably somewhere on the list of most wanted in Egypt at this point. And so showing up just does not make sense whatsoever. I honestly don't know if I am a Hebrew or Egyptian. Or now that I spent 40 years here with the Midians, am I finally Midian? Like, which one am I? Who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? And so Moses is not paying attention to what God is saying, right? He is focused on his past rather on what is before him. He's focused on what he can do or what he has done or what he could do. And so God responds interestingly to his question. Moses says, who am I to go? And God says in verse 12, I will be with you, period. I will be with you. That's his response to the Moses' question of identity. I will be with you, and this is the sign that at some point you are going to come back and worship me here on this mountain. And I will do this, and this is how you'll know that I've done this. Notice how God replies to him, not with, you grew up in Pharaoh's house. You really know the inner workings of Egyptian culture. You speak Egyptian. You have concern for the Hebrews, right? Like, these are all positive things. Or like, you know their customs, or you have been trained in their contemporary education system. Like, they'll listen to you. You'll have the language needed. He doesn't say you have the years of experience of shepherding, although that's a good positive. God's not pointing to that. He doesn't say you have been and known how to survive in the wilderness. For 40 years, I mean, walking around these mountains, you're just the perfect candidate to lead my people into the desert, out of Egypt, right? He doesn't say you are very well qualified. No doubt some of these, or many of these, are true and useful, but that's not what matters when you encounter God. That's what the narrator is showing us here. Instead, he says, I will be with you. The mission is not hinging on who Moses was or is, but the whole point of the mission on who God is and what he is doing. And so this was first Moses' objection, where he said, who am I? God's like, I'm sending you on a mission. The answer probably should have been like, here I am, here I go, or, I'm ready to go. Like, send me, Lord, sure, let's go, let's make this happen. But he begins with an objection. Who am I? That was the first one. There's going to be 4 more, which we're not going to go over today. But all of them, there's this underlying fear and lack of trust. And all along, God patiently will reply and say, I got you. This is not about you. Are you not listening who's talking to you? This moment is holy. I have come to do something new. And he's patiently reminding him of this. Just trust me and I will lead you. And so Moses' second objection does come in our verse 13, where he says, suppose I do go to Israelites and I tell them, the God of your fathers has sent me. And they ask me, what's his name? Right? What's his name? Then what should I tell them? In other words, who am I? But who are you? Like, how do I tell them that this is the God of their fathers? And this leads us to probably one of the most important moments in the entire book of Exodus, according to commentators. And as I've been looking into it, it does make sense. It's a big moment. It's a moment where God says to Moses, I am who I am. I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. Now, in Hebrew, the phrase is Eheyeh asher eheyeh. I have it on the screen on the next slide right there. I will be who I will be. Don't ask me why they keep translating it, I am who I am, or in some cases it is, I will be who I will be. We ourselves, there's a bit of mystery surrounding this whole phrase in the Bible, partially because God revealed his name, right? And there's a bit of a reverence history of how do we even pronounce it, to the point where as time went on, the Jewish people who would copy the Bible, they tried to change, number one, the rules. They didn't want the name of the Lord out of reverence to be said out loud. And so instead of saying like Jehovah, they started to add a substitute of Adonai to it. So they changed a little bit of a consonants. Again, it gets pretty nerdy and geeky, and we sat and listened for like probably 20 minutes trying to get the explanation of how it came about. But the point being, as time went on, because nobody was pronouncing it, and the vowels were substituted so that you wouldn't even accidentally mispronounce it, eventually we have Jehovah is the way that we pronounce it, but we don't even really know what was the original way that he said. We do know, however, the point of it. Because God is simply saying, I am. I simply am. You want to know who there is no qualifiers needed for me. I simply am who I am. He is the one who was and is and always will be. That's all he's saying in this statement. He's the one whose existence doesn't depend on anyone or anything else. He doesn't need anything to qualify him. He just simply is. I remember in a seminar with Tim Mackey that we did, the guy behind Bible Project, me, Paul, and Stan went there, and he said this, it's almost improper to even say that God exists. Like it doesn't make sense to say that because he doesn't exist in the same way that we do. We exist because of him. He is the existence. Our existence is borrowed from his existence. He's above it all. And so in many ways, it's even hard to grasp what that means for him to exist. He just is. He was and is and always will be. And for us, that's always going to be a category hard to grasp. He is eternal and we are temporal. But he's eternal. Like, for example, we are good sometimes. He is always good. That quality never gets less or more, whether it then or now or in the future. We are kind sometimes. We can show the kindness through action. Sometimes he is always. So try to grasp that. Right? Like he is always, he's constant. He is always forever and never changing. He is always who he is. And so when he replies to Moses, yes, it's both of I am who I am, like I simply am. I am the God of the creator of the universe, but it also has this deep packed theological thought into it, that he is self-sufficient, he is overflowing with love and holiness, and this is the God that wants to be with you, Moses, and with you and me. Like this God who is beyond our understanding, and if he's not beyond your understanding, then you're probably not thinking of the right God, right? Because the one that is the reason for our existence is definitely bigger than our brains and minds and thoughts and so on. And so this God wants to be with you, even in the middle of your mess and regret, stricken life with shame and sin, all of that. He wants to be with us. This is the good news. And he paved the way. He comes and invites us to live a new life, to trust him, to know him, and to become part of the future with him. And to Moses, he says, follow me. I, the one who was and is and always will be. And so verse 15, the last one for today, closes with this. God said to Moses, say to Israelites, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac and Jacob, has sent me to you. In this last verse that we're looking at today, God reminds us that he's the God of Genesis. That he created humanity for a purpose. And even when humanity rebelled against him, in the very first pages of the Bible, he already set out on the mission. And that mission has never stopped. Even from a human perspective, it seems like time is going by and nothing is happening. He is always working things out. He is working with the part of humanity that would cooperate with him. Because remember, we pushed him out and we wanted to run the world on our own terms. And so in the midst of it, he's being both patient and gracious and works alongside with those who will say yes to him. Even when humanity rebelled, he said, I'll never leave you alone, and step in and pave the way from sin and darkness into a new life. He says, I was and will be. And most importantly for you and for me is that he is the God that's been guiding for Moses and for us this story all along. He is the one behind the scenes. And so the invitation is trust me as I invite you to bring good news to others. But Exodus, if we're looking at the Old Testament, was never meant to end with Moses. Exodus is not just it is kind of one of the best stories, but it's not just that. right? Like it was meant to point to something bigger. It was always pointing forward to a time when the greater rescue and a greater deliverer would come to launch the final exodus, right? All along, God is working towards the one, because one day, as you know, or might have heard, God himself would come down, right? And become one of us. Not come down in the burning bush like he did to Moses, but he would come and dwell among us. The great I am arrived in a manger and appeared on the streets of Nazareth and Jerusalem and walked among us and paved the way. And he was proclaiming, what was he proclaiming? He was proclaiming, I am the bread of life. I am the vine and you are the branches. Remember these sayings of Jesus? Man, these were echoes of like the great I am. I am the light of the world. I am the door to salvation, Jesus would say. 7 times in John's, and a little more, there's two other references. He would say, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. And most shockingly of all, there was a time when Jesus was standing, and once he replied and he said, before Abraham was, I am. And the guys who were standing and listening, the guys who knew the scriptures really well, they knew what he was saying. They got really mad and they were ready to stone him because this was blasphemy. You are the great I am. And all that is to point is that Jesus was not a prophet. He wasn't just a prophet. He wasn't just a messenger. He wasn't just a good teacher. He is the great and final deliverer who came to bring the final exodus. And this time it wasn't just from Pharaoh, but from sin, regrets, shame, brokenness, and ultimately death. This is the great I am arriving on this earth. And then through his life, death, and resurrection, he made a way for broken people like you and me to be brought out of slavery into a new life. This is the great I am of Exodus. At the center of the whole universe, he is, was, and always will be. And that's why the last book of the Bible proclaims this. Jesus talks to John and says, I am the Alpha and Omega, meaning the first letter of the alphabet and the last. I am with the first things and I will be with the last things, says the Lord God, who is and was and who is to come, the Almighty. The great I am. Moses asked some of the 2 most important questions, and God graciously answered them. The first one was, who am I? That if you're going to seriously take life, you're going to have to ask at one point or another, who am I? And like, what's my life? What's my identity? What's my future? And the second is, who are you? And what you take for an answer to these 2 questions will determine the trajectory and ultimately the destiny of your life. What do you think of God, and what do you think of yourself? If you depend on who you are to the question of who I am, then inevitably your past will continue to define you, right? Like, don't expect something to come into your life if who you are is what you've been so far, and that's all. If nothing new is going to interject into your life, then your life is going to be defined by you, and ultimately that's going to come to an end someday. But if you depend on who God is, then you are invited into a new life. You're invited into a new way where your past is reshaped by the grace of God into something new and beautiful and ultimately redeemed. Even the broken past redeemed and made new. Because the God who revealed himself to Moses in the wilderness, he's still revealing himself today. That's the message that we want to deliver as we kind of go over the book of Exodus, right? Is that it's the same God working. And we can trust him because we've seen him deliver again and again. And we've seen it not just in Exodus, but we've seen it in the life of the people of Israel. He's the same God doing the same work today. He takes the broken pieces of our past and heals us. And then sends us on a mission. He says you don't need to have all these qualifications. You just need to have a heart that is willing to surrender to a new way of life because he is the Alpha and Omega. And because he is the first and the last, your past is not going to define you anymore. That's the message of the good news that swept across the Roman Empire and subsequently all the way to our time, is that your past doesn't define you. You take a childless Abraham, and God calls him father of nations. Can you imagine? Like the past, I lived my whole life, we're childless, we can't have kids. But if God says you're going to be the father of nations, it comes from him. He can rewrite your past. He takes a slave, Joseph, and places him to save the nations during famine. He takes Moses, the murderer, the ambitious deliverer, or self-proclaimed deliverer. And then through God, Moses becomes liberator. He takes a young man who's just a shepherd and appoints him king, as I mentioned. He takes Peter, who denies him, kind of like Judas, very similar, who denies him, but yet nevertheless Peter trusts in Jesus, and God sends him as an apostle. He takes Paul, who was persecuting the church. The past didn't look so great, and he turns him into a missionary. Your past and your regrets and your shame and the things that you carry are no match for the love and the grace of God. All the baggage of our life, if it sits before us today, is no match for the grace that comes from him who can transform you, who can take the worst parts of your life, listen, even the worst, even the things that you wish that would not even come to your mind, he can turn all of those for good if we surrender to him. I close with this, with someone who in today's world found themselves literally enslaved. Rebecca Bender was an average girl. I got a picture of her. Average girl who has never been put in at-risk youth category. She just grew up not too far away from here in a small town in the state of Oregon. And she describes how growing up she found herself searching for love and security and belonging in unhealthy places. Right? As a teenager, she became a young single mother right around high school, I think. She was going to go to college, but never ended up. So she became a young single mother. And of course, she tried to find someone who would love her and help her build a better life. She writes, while all my friends were off doing what college kids do, I was the girl stuck at home with a kid until I met the most amazing man. He was funny and charming. He got to know my hopes and my dreams and my fears. So a bit of time passed after she met this man, and he presented himself as someone who was attentive and protective, but in reality, he groomed her emotionally for months, slowly gaining her trust. He eventually convinced her to move to Las Vegas, where the moment they arrived, she was forced into sex trafficking. And she spent the following 6 years trapped in that world, in a world of coercion and manipulation and fear. She writes one of the things, she's like, dude, I might have been the mom who stood next in line to you and you wouldn't even know because of the kind of pressure that I was living on, how she was subjected to all sorts of abuse. For almost 6 years, she was trapped in the world. She's like, your daughter maybe went to school with yours daughter, right? And you wouldn't even know. She was sold from one trafficker to another for 6 years. And finally, in 2006, investigators closed in on the people behind it. They raided the operation. And so she and her daughter were able to escape, and they went back to Oregon. And what's interesting is she also mentions that the hard part was not even the escape. That the hardest part was how to integrate, how to get back into life. I think even here she says, leaving my trafficker was terrifying, but rebuilding my life felt impossible. I wanted to become the mentor I always needed, so I created this initiative. A little bit giving away where she's going at. But like the rebuilding of the life was hard. And it is in the midst of this brokenness she encounters the God of Exodus. You'll see in a moment. So she meets this group of Christians who showed her support, kind of helped her back to life in Oregon. And it is in her walk with Jesus that she says she came to believe and see that her identity was not defined by what had been done to her or by the choices that she had made. She realized that she was not beyond redemption, that her past didn't have to define her going forward. And the beautiful part is that she realized that her life could be used to help free others. That whatever has happened to her was bad, but because of Jesus in her life, something new could come about. And that realization was the turning point for her that eventually led her into her current ministry. Because today, Rebecca Bender Initiative, through this initiative, she works with churches and law enforcement and communities around the world to combat human trafficking and help survivors rebuild their lives. Something that I found on their website, they say her specialized training have equipped well over 115,000 professionals, including FBI, Homeland Security, local law enforcement, community leaders, medical professionals, and more. Her online school, Elevate Academy, is the largest online school in the world, helping thousands of survivors get the job ready after escape. This is not just me talking about her life, right? Because I'd be like, this is a really great example of what God can do. And it's easy for us, from my seat, right, to look at somebody like that and see, look at how God worked in their lives. This is her talking about this. She wrote a beautiful devotional specifically based on the book of Exodus. In it, she writes this, and I'll close with this quote. We've all had times when the worst parts of ourselves, she says, have gotten the better of us. And we find ourselves oftentimes sitting beside a metaphorical well on the run from our worst, from our own behaviors, wondering, what have I done? And then she goes to say, do you know what I love about God, though? He knows exactly how your brain works. He knows the spiritual lineage, good or bad, that you have inherited. He knows the culture and the community in which you were raised. He knows any of your past traumas or abuse. He knows your upbringing in your childhood. He knows the hard seasons that you walk through and the walls that you have built around your heart because of them. He knows the broken-hearted nights when your tears were collected in a bottle. He created your personality and your gift set, and He understands better than you the neurology and the psychology that you're working with. He knows you. He knows how spiritual warfare will often put that nail strip in front of your speeding car to your strength and use your strength as a weakness. And guess what? He still wants to use you. He still has plans for you. He still has promises and surprises that He wants to fulfill in your life. This is her words. Like I said, this is straight from her Exodus devotional, because she looked at her life and she saw how she was liberated by the one who worked with her all along. This is the great I Am that we get to worship tonight. The God who takes anything, nothing will surprise Him, and makes it into a new story. And so I invite you, if you're willing and able, would you please stand? I have no other call to response today than to worship the one who has changed my life and changed the life of so many others in this room. He is the great I Am who rewrites our stories. And so I just invite you as a response to worship Him. And if you don't know Him yet, this is a perfect time to respond to Him and to call on His name and invite Him to be the Savior over your life and liberator over your life. And let us pray. Yes, Jesus. There are times when I cannot wait for you to move in some areas of life where darkness and enslavement and addiction and sin destroys, Lord, the lives of our loved ones and people that we know or people in our community, in our country. We want you to move and we want you to do something about it. And we can't wait for that to happen. But I'm also reminded, Lord, that you hold the whole history in your hands. And unlike my limited perspective or even our collective humanity perspective, you see beyond what I will be able to see in my lifetime, and you are doing something good in the midst of it all. And we already get to see the foretaste of it as we look forward to the day when finally all things will be set right, where every injustice will be made right, Lord, and justice will be served. But I also know that on that day also we will stand in the grace and mercy of the justice that will not be served to us, because we chose to be part of the redeeming story. We chose to respond to your goodness and your grace. We chose to invite you into our life. And then you did all the work and you carried us through all the way. And I believe you will carry us even to the end. And so we look, Lord, towards the day when we get to worship you in heaven, the Alpha and Omega, the one who was, who is, and yet to come, the Almighty God, the great I Am. And it's in your name we sing today.